Sacrifice.
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 Proper sacrifice.
What would you give up to get everything you've ever wanted? What would you sacrifice to achieve your dreams? Money, time, sure, but what about your integrity? What about the lives of the people that you love? This is one of the key themes explored in Kentaro Miura's Berserk, a demon-filled revenge story following the swordsman Guts. Within Berserk's universe, some humans are given the opportunity to gain otherworldly powers and fulfill their darkest dreams. But there's a catch. In order to receive this power, they must perform a sacrifice, and this sacrifice can't just be anything or anyone. It must be of significant worth. In Berserk's prologue, The Black Swordsman, we get the following scene explaining the rules. During a whirlwind fight against a demonic tyrannical count, Guts and the count are transported to a surrealist realm occupied by the God Hand, a collection of the most powerful of demon kind. The count, having been nearly decimated by Guts, is desperate for an extra boost of power and calls out for their help. The God Hand encourages the count to save himself by performing the Invocation of Doom, a sacrifice ritual in exchange for even more demonic powers. Initially, the count tries to offer up his opponent Guts, but the God Hand declares his offer not good enough. They explain that a sacrificial offering must be someone who is close to you, someone you love, someone so important to you that it is almost like giving up a part of your own soul. With fear in his eyes, the count stares at his poor daughter who has been caught up in this horrible mess. In common everyday language, we often use sacrifice to refer to giving up some sort of short-term pleasure to achieve a larger, more important goal. A great example of a sacrifice would be not drinking with your friends on a Friday night so you have an extra hour of studying to get ready for a test on Monday. And this sort of softer, more casual use of sacrifice is certainly important, but it doesn't seem to carry the same sort of weight that we think of when we have a historical religious sacrifice. There's a big difference between not drinking for a few hours versus, say, throwing someone into a volcano to appease the gods. In fact, this more casual use of sacrifice can be very inconsistent. When I go to a coffee shop and spend $5 on a coffee, we don't think about that as a sacrifice, even if I'm using that energy to get through the day and get more important stuff done. We usually talk about it as a purchase, an investment, a trade-off, but never really a sacrifice. And perhaps most importantly, I don't think Kentaro Miura meant this when he was talking about sacrifice. So what is the difference between a trade-off and a sacrifice? Well, perhaps a philosopher can answer that question. Berserk's use of the term is very in line with the usage from the philosopher Ayn Rand. The Russian-American author once wrote,
"Sacrifice does not mean the rejection of the evil for the sake of the good, but of the good for the sake of the evil. Sacrifice is the surrender of that which you value in favor of that which you don't."
In Rand's definition, it seems that the nature of a sacrifice is to give up the good for the evil. And it's this type of sacrifice that we really should be wary of. Sure, you might not ever have to sacrifice your daughter's soul to achieve some sort of demonic goal, but you might sacrifice your integrity. There will be plenty times in life where you could give up parts of your humanity to achieve something that you know is not the right thing to do. Let's look at a real-world example of this type of sacrifice. Consider a criminal like Bernie Madoff, who defrauded thousands of investors in order to get rich. In the process of doing this, he not only sacrificed his integrity and sacrificed the trust of the people that he loved, but he also really sacrificed his mental health. Article after article explains that Bernie Madoff was constantly in a state of anxiety, and often didn't feel the relief until he was finally caught. Now look, I'm not trying to make the argument that Miura was reading Atlas Shrugged while writing Berserk. I'm just pointing out that there are some similarities to these definitions. It seems that Rand's fundamental warning, a warning that we should all listen to, especially the characters in Berserk, is that sacrificing the important parts of yourself and your life for some improper goal, no matter how tempting, ultimately leads to self-destruction. But let's get back to the manga. This wasn't the first time the Count had a chance to make a sacrifice. By the time Guts encounters him, he's already lost much of his humanity. The townspeople he ruled over feared his inquisition. He led a crusade of violence against anyone labeled a heretic, though this religious justification appears to be a smokescreen for his sadistic pleasures. It wasn't always this way. Years before Guts encounters him, the Count was a human nobleman, living a lovely life with his happy family. One day, upon returning from a military campaign, he rushed home in search of his wife's loving embrace. but his picturesque life was about to be rocked to his core. He swung open a door to find a shocking sight of his beloved wife red in hedonistic pleasure on top of a pagan orgy. In a fit of rage, the Count slayed each and every heretic until only his wife remained. Stained in blood, he was unable to take the final blow and directed his sword to himself. In a twist of fate, the God Hand was summoned and the Count's first invocation of doom was initiated. He was promised a permanent ending to his sorrow and despair in exchange for the sacrifice of his beloved wife. This first time, the Count had no trouble trading someone he loved to bury his fragile human heart. If sacrifice means giving up the good for the evil, then we need some sort of system for evaluating what actually counts as good. How do we know that the people that we love are more important than power? What and who should be our priority? Thus, we need some sort of standard to rank our values. And this standard can't be arbitrary. A life based on randomness and emotional impulses isn't a very good long-term strategy. Imagine a hedonistic drug addict who claims to only care about long-term pleasure. He drains his bank account seeking out his next fix. Such a life does not last very long without intervention, and ironically fails to actually achieve the goal of having a life of long-term pleasure. If you truly care about enjoying life, you need to make your survival and flourishing a foundational priority. Your life itself must become the foundational value in which you build your hierarchy from. It's within this value hierarchy that we can finally understand why you must never sacrifice. To give up your most important goals for some short-term fleeting pleasure can lead to suffering, if not literal death. One of the most important values in life is other people. The people that we love make life worth living. If we want to be happy, we have to make them a priority. Those like Berserk's Count, claiming to love their family but ultimately sacrificing them to avoid pain, are fundamentally cowards who will lose their humanity. They don't have their value hierarchy in the right order, and as such will pay the ultimate price. After the God Hand explains the Count's original sacrifice to everyone, he is once again offered a choice. Will he offer his daughter as a sacrifice to enable his murderous rampage? It's explained that at this point, the Count is already doomed to hell. His soul will dissolve into the abyss, and he'll lose the final remnants of himself, a fate granted for all who sacrifice like he did. In a final moment of clarity, the Count realizes that his life as a disgusting monster is not worth the life of his daughter. His last action as his soul is dragged into the abyss is to scream his daughter's name, Teresia. Sacrifice is a heavy, complex, and deeply human concept. It forces us to confront our priorities, re-question our values, and ask ourselves what really matters in life. The Count's final act of screaming his daughter's name is not redemption. It's regret. It's the final gasps of a man consumed by his choices. A man whose life of sacrifices has left him with a trail of pain and destruction. We must remember that sacrifice is not just supernatural bargains in the realm of fantasy. It exists in all of the choices that we make throughout our life. Will we sacrifice our loved ones for hollow ambitions? Will we give up our integrity for fleeting ambitions? Let the Count's story serve as a stark warning. A life built on sacrificing what really matters is a life doomed to collapse under its own weight. Thank you for watching.